Get used to seeing this, gamers, because it seems like 70 is the new 60. It's not too surprising, AAA console games have cost $60 since this guy was president. It's honestly surprising that $60 remained the standard for new AAA games for over a decade when you consider the scale of video game production has ballooned. CD Projekt Red's 2015 game The Witcher 3 cost about $81 million to make, which includes everything from development to marketing, while CD Projekt Red's latest venture in 2020, Cyberpunk 2077, cost about $316 million. Video game development used to be a handful of college grads in a room crunching out games in less than a year to nowadays where you have thousands of developers from all over the globe working simultaneously on projects that take nearly half a decade. Yet they still come out unfinished. But with the price of new games changing, it got me thinking about the value of games. I mean, why is $60 the standard price? It wasn't always this way. Back in the late 2000s, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 games were set at a standard $60 price, but Wii games were only $50. It made sense as, let's face it, the Wii was basically a GameCube on Red Bull. But if we go back even further to the 90s, we see that there really wasn't a standard game price. Check out this Toys R Us holiday catalog from 1992. We've got a few Super Nintendo games on here. You got Zelda: A Link to the Past, only $50. You've got EA's PGA Tour Golf for $60. You know, we're all used to that price. But if we look at these two games here, we've got Mario Paint, which costs $60. However, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time costs $65, despite the fact that both games were released in the same month. But then you've got Street Fighter 2 for $70. What's up with that? If we go a couple of years later, we start seeing PlayStation 1 and N64 games. Doom 64, Turok, and Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey were all $75? Yeesh! Is this what it's like to have a good economy? For some reason, NBA Hang Time was only $55 on the PlayStation, but it cost $70 on the Sega Genesis? This was a console released 6 years earlier. I know it says $48 in this picture, but if you look a little closer, it says it costs $48 after using a coupon, which gives you $7 off any Sony PlayStation cartridge. Yeah, remember those PS1 cartridges? I guess they were still getting used to discs, so they just called anything that played a game a cartridge. But anyway, it's weird that the last generation version of this game costs more than the next gen version. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Well, this has to do with development costs. CDs, they're dirt cheap, and they can be easily mass-produced for a ton of different games. However, cartridges are quite a bit more complex and more unique. Look at this Super Mario Land Game Boy cartridge versus this Pokemon Blue Game Boy cartridge. If you look inside, they look completely different. Cartridges are kind of like tiny computers themselves, and some of them have extra processors, memory, and sound channels that gave developers more freedom in how they created their games. One of the most famous chips used in a game cartridge was the Super FX chip, designed by Argonaut Games, which allowed Super Nintendo games to have enhanced 3D polygon rendering. We saw this used in games like Star Fox, Super Mario World 2, and Doom. One of the most influential cartridge chips was the MMC1 chip, which gave NES games like The Legend of Zelda the ability to save your data via battery-powered static RAM, so you could continue your adventures in Hyrule even after you shut off the console. Earlier I talked about Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. Well, most likely the reason that game was so expensive was because Street Fighter 2 was released on an absolutely humongous, gargantuan 2 megabyte game cartridge. So games being more expensive in some cases made sense back then. But eventually cartridges were left in the past, and the super cost-efficient optical discs were used instead for home console games. Making a video game no longer required you to build a specialized circuit board. You could just dump some files on a CD. So naturally, this should mean that games got drastically more affordable, right? No. While, yes, CD games were definitely cheaper for a while, they weren't a ton cheaper, and as we've seen over the years, eventually the prices of disc games caught up. Or did they? Let me introduce you to my friend, inflation. As time goes on, the price of the dollar drops. A dollar in the year 1996 is worth about $1.90 in 2022. So spending $60 on a game back in 1996 would be the equivalent of buying a game today for... Oh. Remember how much the 60GB PlayStation 3 cost at launch in 2006?
$599 US.
Adjusted for inflation, that would be roughly... Oof. You think Joy-Cons are expensive now? Look at how much N64 controllers would be worth adjusted for inflation. Oh, that's still less. Okay, Nintendo, what are you doing? So, in general, it seems that games have actually gotten considerably less expensive. Games have gotten cheap, and it seems like games are getting cheaper and cheaper. So cheap that they're literally free. How is that even possible? Well, I can answer that if you think about what you're using to watch this very video, the internet. Before, to get your games out there for people to buy, you needed to deal with manufacturers to make copies of your game. You needed deals with retail stores to get those copies on shelves. It was a lot. Now, game devs can use Steam or itch.io or heck, make a website themselves to sell their games for people to download. That's why there's sales all the time on Steam. Summer sale, fall sale, winter sale, lunar sale, publisher sales. It's honestly surprising whenever I open up Steam and there's no sale. And it's all because the cost to get a copy of your game to the consumer is next to nothing when digitally downloading outside of some fees. This has led to a wide variety in the prices of new games. Let's look at some games from 2022. You got Modern Warfare 2, $70, Splatoon 3, $60, Live Alive, $50, Kena Bridge of Spirits, $40, Dwarf Fortress, $30, Dragon Ball The Breakers, $20. Personally, I think it's a good thing that there's variety in the prices because it allows the price to more accurately reflect the game's value. Not every game is worth $60. But that got me thinking, what is a game's worth? How do we apply a value to a game? What standard do we hold a game at when it's sold at a specific price point? Well, for a full price game, I expect no glaring bugs. I think that's a pretty base level requirement. If I buy a game, I expect it to work. I'm pretty sure most people would want a game to be fun. That can manifest itself in a lot of ways, so I won't go too deep into that, but a game should be enjoyable. And the last main thing I'd say most people want out of a game is content. A game should have a good amount of stuff to do, otherwise it feels like you're playing a demo. But how much content should a game have? Everyone has played a game that, while it had a lot of content, just felt bloated. Like the game could have been half as long and been better for it. So I guess I should ask you guys, how long does a $60 game have to be for you to feel like it was worth it? Maybe 40 hours is a good rough baseline for how much content a $60 game should have. That's about $1.50 per hour of content. Movie tickets cost about $10, and if a movie lasts about 2 hours, then you're spending $5 per hour of content. Technically, that would make a full-price video game a better price per hour of content ratio than a movie. What about food? Fast food burgers are about $4 these days, and I can eat one of those in maybe 5 minutes if I take my time. That's only 80 cents per minute of content. And if we do a little bit of math on that, we can convert the minutes to hours, and that's $48 per hour of content. That sounds like a terrible deal. But most online streaming platforms cost around $10 per month. Let's say you watch 2 hours of streamed content a day. Multiply that times 30 days in a month, and online streaming services only cost you 16 cents per hour of content. But of course, judging content based on how much time you invest in it is a flawed metric, obviously, because not every hour of content is created equal. I'd rather spend an hour playing really fun and interesting levels than spend 5 hours grinding. Quality over quantity. But at the same time, if a game only lasted an hour and you paid $60 for it, even if it was the greatest hour of gaming you'd ever experienced, you'd feel somewhat cheated. You didn't really get a chance to fully enjoy it. It was like a flash and then it was gone. But let's say you do find a really cheap, great game with a ton of content. We see this a lot with indie games like Stardew Valley or Terraria. I've sunk in over 100 hours each into both games. Stardew Valley is only $15 and Terraria is only $10. But hypothetically, let's say instead of $10, Terraria's price was $60. The game is the exact same, but instead of buying it for $10, you bought it for $60. How would you feel about that? Would you still feel like your purchase was worth it? Obviously, this depends on how much you like Terraria, because I'd say, yeah, it's definitely worth it for the huge number of hours of enjoyment I got out of it. I'd spend $60 on this over a ton of big budget cookie cutter releases. I guess what got me thinking about this were the games that never go on sale, or if they do, it's a very small dip. games like Factorio, plenty of first-party Nintendo games, and RimWorld. It would be my luck that this game went on for its biggest sale yet while I was making this video. Seeing these games at a discount will make you slap yourself in the face to see if you're dreaming. Now, like a lot of people at first, I found this annoying. After a game has been out for a year, I think at least a sale or two is pretty fair. Plus, sales will help give even more people a chance to play your game. It just seemed greedy to me. But after thinking about it, it makes sense why these games don't go on sale. It's because they don't need to. Games like Mario Kart, Smash, and Minecraft are always gonna sell. These are games that you dump hundreds of hours into over multiple years. The kind of games that never get old. These aren't games you play once for the campaign and then forget about. Those types of games are the ones that need to go on sale to give people a reason to get them. Games like sports titles that drop down to nearly a third of their original price only 3 months after release. And that's because the companies who release these games know these games' lifespans are incredibly short. Everyone knows that the game is going to be obsolete in a year when the shiny new version comes out. Some games go down in value, some games stay the same in value, but sometimes you get those games that go up in value. Once a game goes out of print, it becomes less available, meaning people are going to be more willing to pay extra to get it, which means prices for old games can get a little on the higher side. I mean, hey, I can understand the hustle, but man, does it suck that these games cost so much. I guess these prices wouldn't be so high unless people were willing to pay though. And man, are people willing to pay. However, I know I'm not. Everyone values things differently though. So to answer the question, how much is a game worth? I don't know, however much you want to pay for it, I guess.